Hi, my name is Daniel Lassick, and for this facilitation technique, we're going to be discussing stress management. Now, we're going to talk some of the effects that stress has on individuals. When individuals are strained by constant stress, the long-term stress system is activated and can have precarious results. Although stress at healthy amounts can promote creativity, enjoyment, and sense of fulfillment, when stress is constant at imbalanced proportions, the body becomes susceptible to various amount of diseases. Some of these diseases are heart disease, depression, and obesity. Now, there are two methods we can use to combat and alleviate stress. So to prevent these negative symptoms from the future. And these two stress management techniques we're going to discuss in this project are yoga and progression relaxation. By definition, stress is at its simplest form tension exerted on a material object. The National Institute of Mental Health defines stress as the brain's response to any demand perceived by the individual. Stress, perceived stress, and the cause of stress are all connected with physical changes and emotional reactions. There are two forms of stress: positive stress, which is known as eustress, or negative stress, which is known as de-stress. Yoga, by definition, is the process that affects physical, mental, and intellectual levels. In simplest terms, yoga is defined as yoke or union, the connection of mind, body, and spirit into one. Through yoga, one is taught discipline to calm the body, mind, and spirit. There are three forms of yoga we will review: Hatha yoga, Raja yoga, and Asana. Hatha yoga is associated with postural and breathing exercises. Hatha yoga translates to union by bodily control. Most participants will be using this form of yoga in different classes and settings. Raja yoga translates as king and is often thought of as the king of all yoga practices. It is a form of yoga associated with the mind and meditation practices and diving into one's inner universe. It is a self-reflective method to form conclusions and to find ways to obtain goals that someone might be struggling with or trying to reflect to figure stuff out. Asana is derived from the root word, which means sit. Yoga postures taught in traditional Western yoga classes prepare the body and mind for meditation. The meditative processes are explored further with specific sequences and body postures. Now, there are common names for progressive relaxation, some of which are relaxation therapy, relaxation training, progressive muscle relaxation, and progressive relaxation training. This is a method for treating individuals experiencing psychological stress and physical symptoms associated with stress. Progressive relaxation is defined as a systematic application of techniques that enable people to relax or reduce physical tension. And later on in this project, we're going to go into depth what it means and how we can see progressive relaxation come to play to benefit the participants. Now, what is a description for stress? The routines, habits, and attitudes associated with daily life determine how well a person responds to stress. The underlying theme of addressing stress is having a sense of control. When an individual has a sense of control of their stress reception, they are less likely to become overrun by their stress. There are activities designed to reduce stress using yoga and progressive relaxation. So basically, stress is not something that is actual, but it's really perceived by the individual. What may be stressful to one person may not be stressful, or even it could be relaxing for another. So stress is really perceived by the individual. Yoga is the oldest and most comprehensive system for wellness that focuses on mind, body, and spirit. Yoga was developed to reveal human essentials relationship between body and mind. Although yoga has had direct link to spiritual foundations, research has begun to study the positive effects of yoga on physical, mental, and emotional issues. There is an inherent goal for yoga, which is to bring complete healing through all domains: physical, energy, through nutrition, meditative, and positive thoughts. So, yoga is not necessarily a form of poses that people could do it at the studio, but it's more like a way of life for a lot of those who practice yoga. And what it brings is to bring unity and for the entire being of the person so they can have their complete wellness in every aspect of their lives. And in therapy settings, yoga therapy is used as an intervention to prevent and aid recovery for physical and mental ailments. There are all styles of yoga incorporated within yoga therapy, which is created into a sadhana or a routine. Now, what a sadhana is basically it's a routine specified for a specific need within for the person. So not every yoga routine is the same for everyone. What works for one person may not necessarily be beneficial for someone else. So that's why yoga is very, very unique towards the individual and the need looking for. Now, progressive relaxation has been used extensively over the last several decades to bring many benefits to help alleviate pain and bring relaxation for the participants. Basic procedures used by patients are outlined by Bursing and Barkovic, which could be followed by the participants in every session. Now, the basic procedures are these. They focus on tension on each muscle group. They tense each muscle group. They maintain that tension, basically that pose of that muscle group for a certain amount of time, and they maintain the attention. Basically, when you tense that area, the participant is focused as they tense and release that area, which brings the alleviation, basically. There are variations of different muscle groups being used as target areas to build, and they could be used in successive chains. The contractions are used during sessions and aid participants in obtaining greater relaxations. So, if, for example, if someone's having some pain in their lower back, they may use some exercises that tense their lower back, but the benefit might be greater if they use chains of lower back movements and tension as well as upper back, shoulder, or let's say legs, to have a greater benefit achieved by the participant. Now, let's go through the history studies of stress. The stress response, allostasis, also known as a fight or flight response, was vital to survival in more primitive times. Although uncommon nowadays to experience life threatening events, it is not unusual to experience similar levels of stress from other events that are non life threatening. This high level of stress affects the body in a number of ways, such as biological, physiological, psychological, and emotional changes. Being under allostasis and for a certain amount of time will leave the individual prone to diseases and illnesses related to stress. So basically, you don't have to be in a dire situation to really be to experience this level of fight or flight. As we said earlier, stress is perceived by the individual. So it's just not necessarily the same for everybody. So one person could be walking by you, it could be the same job as you, and they could be under total allostasis fight or flight mode. In reality, you wouldn't think twice because on the outside there's nothing really much going on different than yourself. So everyone's prone to stress is different. And we see that when somebody's going through high levels of this fight or flight allostasis, they are more susceptible to diseases that are related to stress. So, yoga's history has been very vast and intertwined with different aspects of change and complexity. One reference to yoga came from the Bhagavata Gita, dating back to the 6th and 3rd century BC. The earliest indications of yoga practice have been found in 5,000-year-old ceramics, which were decorated with yogic meditative postures. Yoga in most more primitive times, in some other places of the world today, was viewed as conduct rather than a system of doctrines. So, like I said earlier, yoga was viewed and upheld not just as meditation or certain poses, but as a way of life, really. And through these meditations, a lot of the religious people, the Hindus, for example, were able to write down their view of doctrines. In Western culture, the practice of yoga would be attributed to the introduction of when Swami Vivekananda came to America in 1893 at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. And what happened here, he began to discuss his views, his spiritual views with everyone else's, and this is when yoga was really introduced in the West during this meeting. And Swami is still considered today as the father of yoga in the West, and whose influence has kept the open dialogue between Eastern and Western philosophies until this day. Now, in modern times, yoga is used about 10% of adults here in America, and that's basic. That's widely attributed to being available. We have DVDs, we have the internet, YouTube, we have different obviously community service fitness centers that even medical facilities that offer yoga, and it's more it's available now, so people are open to it, and that's how we have a staggering amount of 10% of American adults all practicing yoga. And progressive relaxation, the history is a little different, and Edmund Jacobson developed a progressive relaxation training procedure. Edmund Jacobson, he's the guy behind it. He conducted his studies at Harvard University in 1908 and continued his studies at Cornell University and at the University of Chicago. This led to the publication of his first technique in the American Journal of Psychology in 1925. Since then, many systematic dissertations techniques were used for individuals who experience anxiety surrounding a particular event or setting. So Jacobson was particularly interested in anxiety from specific events or settings that would set people basically on edge or set them off into a stress-induced behavior. And there are actually 200 different muscle relaxation exercises, and probably more, related to progressive relaxation. But it is more common nowadays to just use about 20 of these practical interventions per person to see what are their needs, for example, and what can really benefit them. Now, there are two theories we're going to discuss in this chapter found in literature. And the first one is physiological disruptions due to stress. And the second is analytical introspection. Now, these theories are unique to each own, and they both have different views on how to approach stress. And the more complex of the two would have to be physiological disruption due to stress. And this theory explains the body's response to stress in either one or two ways. First way is acute alarm, or the second, chronic vigilance. Now, when someone is under the acute alarm form of stress, it's basically the short term for fight or flight response, which starts at the hypothalamic region of the brain. And so it's a chemical reaction going on in the hypothalamic region of the brain when someone perceives this intense stress that's about to happen. And the chronic state of acute alarm causes neglect of other bodily functions, weakening the immune system or leaving the body vulnerable in previously injured areas. So what essentially does, it puts your body into overdrive. And you can imagine if a car that is constantly running or a battery that's on 100% on using its power, after a while it's going to start to get weak and deteriorate. This is the same way when someone goes under constant fight or flight mode. All right, after a while the mental physiological and physical changes in their body starts to wear them down. Second would be chronic vigilance. Okay, so it's not acute, but it's a chronic um, occurrence that happens in this person's life. And chronic vigilance is a response to stress which enables the body to respond to long-term persistent danger. Key word here is persistent, which is the main difference from the original acute. This response is triggered by the pituitary gland at the base of the brain, stimulating the adrenal gland to release cortisol into the bloodstream. Now, when cortisol is released, the body experiences a number of physiological changes. All right, so once again, the anatomy of the person begins to change, the emotional response, the mental response, all begin to change once cortisol is present in the bloodstream. After prolonged exposure, it is more likely that future experiences exposed to cortisol would produce more negative symptoms for the individual. What stress essentially does is to begin to wear down this person and the person's body. The other theoretical foundation is analytical introspection. And this theory is built upon Jacobson's progressive relaxation training. And this is the process when individuals gain the ability to control their thoughts and emotions through self-reflection. When Jacobson hypothesized that if individuals practice specific relaxation techniques, they gain introspective control over psychological processes that usually lead to tension. So he's basically saying, or he believes that when if a person's able to recognize the changes in their body or they perceive the stress from happening, they are able to manipulate it in a way to reduce the tension from happening and be less severe. Based on this idea, one can actually identify the physiological changes and, if possible, reduce the emotional tension from being so high, severe. So now we're going to discuss the effectiveness of yoga and progressive relaxation techniques. We're going to discuss three different cases where the first two underwent yoga treatments and the last went through progressive relaxations. And we're going to briefly discuss some of the results that were found in research. So for the first research done was to study yoga and and the effects on cardiovascular functioning. Chu and his colleagues examined effects of yoga on risk factors for CVD and metabolic syndrome through an extensive literature review, and by using meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. The results showed that the practice of yoga may be beneficial in managing and improving risk factors associated with CVD and metabolic syndrome. So basically, in this research that was conducted, that there is enough evidence to support the conclusion that regular yoga practice, including asana, pranayama, meditation, dietary changes, positively influences individuals who encounter CVD issues. There is positive evidence for reduction for hypertension and stress-related inflammation, which is pretty good news. This is good news, for those who may be stressed out from that might have experiencing CBD or hypertension. Yoga could definitely help you out. The second case being studied is the correlation between yoga and those with learning difficulties. According to Shapiro and colleagues, there is evidence introducing contemplative practices when working with children in early learning may actually cultivate brain development and learning abilities. There are some research studies providing support that learning and cognitive understanding, such as subject comprehension, actually increases when students, including those with intellectual disabilities, begin to incorporate yoga practices into their daily lives. So this is amazing that even young children with intellectual disabilities or different cognitive issues may benefit from yoga practices that can increase their attention span. And I'm sure different cognitive functions, that one may be having difficulty with. In one study with progressive relaxation training, they were studying the effects on those with high levels of anxiety. Clannad and Yobas and colleagues conducted a systematic review examining empirical evidence of relaxation interventions on anxiety and depression on older adults. The older adults who received relaxation interventions experienced greater reductions in depression and anxiety than controls in most of the studies done. So most of the individuals, the older adults went over that experience of progressive relaxation indeed had depression and anxiety levels reduced after the studies. Progressive relaxation training has been effective in reducing anxiety in people of various ages, including adolescents as well as older adults. There is research to support the conclusion that people experiencing illnesses or injury and those with limited physical abilities experience a reduction in their anxiety levels after participating in a few sessions, prescribed sessions of progressive relaxation training. So we went over a lot of the history. We went over to the effectiveness of yoga and progressive relaxation. I hope you guys enjoyed the project, and now we're going to move on to the actual demonstration of some yoga practices. Thank you.